All right. So you guys should be seeing my screen, whichever one that is. Oh, here we go. This one says Olmec, Maya, and Aztec. Is that what everybody's seeing?
Yeah.
Okay. Now I'm going to try to watch a video with everybody. And if it works right, we're going to have, we're two videos. I'm also going to have links to the recording of this in our attendance thing. So if it doesn't work out, um, everybody can watch it anyway. But I want to see if it'll work with you guys. Okay, do you guys see this where it says art?
Yes.
Okay. Now, this week we're oh, before I start into that, did you guys all have a good weekend? I saw some really good projects that came in, and I think both of you guys did projects too that you submitted. I what I'd like to do, if it's okay with you guys, is watch these two videos. Then we'll look at those two projects, and if you guys don't mind, just saying a little bit about what your inspiration was. Because I'm glad I'm pretty sure Zach, you and Cassandra both turned in uh, projects this weekend, and I thought they were both pretty decent. So,
Oh, thanks.
well,
It was a lot of fun and a huge learning curve to try to figure out how to do a video mixed with reference. And I spent more time trying to figure it out than the subject involved, but I think next time we'll be even better at it. So,
that's great. That's awesome. Well, and I enjoy hearing stuff like that. I'm always surprised that somebody who's under 30 finds new things to learn. So I'm happy you guys are learning stuff too. That's great.
I'm 47.
You're 47.
Yeah.
You do not sound like it. Well, good. I'm glad you learned something new. Right. So what I want to do is we're going to look at these two videos and we're going to talk about them a little bit and then we're going to launch into stuff. Okay. All righty.
Awesome.
Got it, boss.
Okay. So please tell me when you got. I'm going to start it. We'll hear some noise. I'll pause it and I want you guys to tell me if you can hear it and see it as well.
When we hear that word, some of our minds jump to museum.
Could you guys
Yes, we
hear it?
can.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. Great. That is awesome. Okay.
The
Here we go.
frame rate might be a bit weird, but it should be watchable and hearable.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
Or framed paintings. And in that context, some people think, nah, I'm not a big fan of art. I just don't get it. Or they think of art as something that's just for intellectuals or artsy people. But really, art is for anyone who wants to experience it, and it's often in more places than we might realize. Songs you like, movies you watch, poems, theater, even a quilt that your grandmother made. All of that and more is art. So you might be wondering, well, then what is art? How do I define it? Well, that's tough. Art's been around for thousands of years, and through the ages it's evolved in a number of different ways. And the reasons for creating it vary from person to person depending on any number of factors. So defining art is pretty tricky, and it's something that's been debated throughout history. There just isn't one agreed upon definition. However, many believe that art is anything that stirs emotion in you. Now, the emotions that get stirred up depend entirely on your own history, your story, everything that comes together to make up who you are. And because of this, 3 different people can experience the same piece of art and have wildly different reactions to it. One person might think it's the most beautiful thing they've ever seen, the second person might hate it, and the third might not feel much of anything at all. And none of them would be wrong. Everyone's entitled to their own preferences and feelings when it comes to art. You know, the way you feel about your favorite song could be the same way that someone else feels about their favorite sculpture. And even though you might not like that sculpture, it can be valuable to consider why that person enjoys it so much. You may learn something about them and maybe even yourself. The term art is really just a label. Over the years, a lot of people have tried to classify what it is or what it isn't, but that's not really what art is about. It's about your personal experience with it and the meaning that you draw from it. Everyone reacts to art differently and has the potential to grow and learn from it. It gives us the opportunity to tell stories, record history, and tap into our emotions in a way that few other things can.
Goodwill Community Foundation, creating opportunities.
Yeah, I really like that short video. There's another one I'm going to try to find and show you guys next week that I think is also good. But I will offer an idea or proposal, I guess, for a definition of art. I think art is the activity or the evidence of the activity of anything we do when we make something new using things outside of our immediate awareness, our immediate ego-driven self. The things that we look at in this class have to be, by necessity, just one aspect of that. It's the physical aspect of that. All art is not physical. I mean, art is poetry, art is music, but art is also horticulture. Art is growing potatoes in a field. Art is teaching kindergartners. Art is a lot of things whenever we are doing something outside of our ordinary ego-driven self. And the ego-driven self, that's the part of us that wants us to eat right now, that wants us to slap the fly on our arm. When we move beyond that, we have a tendency to open the door for something that is less immediate. I think art a lot of the times is really good at providing an avenue for communication that is way outside the ordinary restrictions of language. There's a really good chance that since this class, the time period ends at 1350, there's a really good chance you guys are going to have a very low probability of meeting any of the artists whose work we look at. And there is still something there, though, that leaves some of their presence behind, and we are still communicating somewhat. Whether or not we understand what they're trying to say, at the very least, we are connecting with an aspect of them that provides consciousness and identity. And I think that that's really good to consider. And when we look at this next video, I want you to ask yourself too, what is the art that we're responding to? What is the art that we like or don't like? And my knee-jerk reaction to that question is the art that is on display or the art that is made by the artist is something that is different than the art that we remember encountering. The art that we remember encountering is a fusion of the thing that we see or the thing that we hear or the thing that we experience and our own processing regarding it. I say that because I am pretty sure that everybody has memories of encountering something that you had one reaction to at the moment you encountered it for the first time and a very different reaction to it during the moment you encountered it another time. For me, an example of that is mushrooms. Edible mushrooms, I thought, was an oxymoron. I could not stand them. They were so disgusting. And then sometime after puberty, I decided, you know what, life is going to be a lot more interesting if I open myself up to experiences. So I tried a lot of foods and flavors that I never even considered were edible. And among those is I started trying mushrooms. I think first time I tried it was at a Korean barbecue restaurant, just picking up a bunch of mushrooms in my bowl for the guy to cook in front of me. And it opened up a door that I was not even aware was there. I know everybody has different stories. Another story of mine is regarding encountering Picasso. Something else is looking at Roman art. You know, a lot of the stuff that we have seen, I have very strong feelings one way, and then I encountered it again after I had grown up a bit or lived a while, and I don't think I'll ever grow up. But returning to it, I'm encountering it as a different person, and it becomes a different experience. So think about that as we watch this next video. This is about 4 minutes long. Can you guys see it? It says, who decides what art means?
Yes.
Okay.
Sir.
Oh, thank you for showing up. And who is the person that just joined us? Okay, we've got Haley and we've got Lindsay. Excellent. Thank you so much for being here. Okay.
Imagine you and a friend are strolling through an art exhibit and a striking painting catches your eye. The vibrant red appears to you as a symbol of love, but your friend is convinced it's a symbol of war. And where you see stars in a romantic sky, your friend interprets global warming-inducing pollutants. To settle the debate, you turn to the internet, where you read that the painting is a replica of the artist's first-grade art project. Red was her favorite color, and the silver dots are fairies. You now know the exact intentions that led to the creation of this work. Are you wrong to have enjoyed it as something that the artist didn't intend? Do you enjoy it less now that you know the truth? Just how much did the artist's intention affect your interpretation of the painting? It's a question that's been tossed around by philosophers and art critics for decades, with no consensus in sight. In the mid-20th century, literary critic W.K. Wimsatt and philosopher Monroe Beardsley argued that artistic intention was irrelevant. They called this the intentional fallacy, the belief that valuing an artist's intentions was misguided. Their argument was twofold. First, the artists we study are no longer living, never recorded their intentions, or are simply unavailable to answer questions about their work. Second, even if there were a bounty of relevant information, Wimsatt and Beardsley believed that it would distract us from the qualities of the work itself. They compared art to a dessert. When you taste a pudding, the chef's intentions don't affect whether you enjoy its flavor or texture. All that matters, they said, is that the pudding works. Of course, what works for one person might not work for another. And since different interpretations appeal to different people, the silver dots in our painting could be reasonably interpreted as fairies, stars, or pollutants. By Wimsatt and Beardsley's logic, the artist's interpretation of her own work would just be one among many equally acceptable possibilities. If you find this problematic, you might be more in line with Stephen Knapp and Walter Ben Michaels, two literary theorists who rejected the intentional fallacy. They argued that an artist's intended meaning was not just one possible interpretation, but the only possible interpretation. For example, suppose you're walking along a beach and come across a series of marks in the sand that spell out a verse of poetry. Knapp and Michaels believed the poem would lose all meaning if you discovered these marks were not the work of a human being, but an odd coincidence produced by the waves. They believed an intentional creator is what makes the poem subject to understanding at all. Other thinkers advocate for a middle ground, suggesting that intention is just one piece in a larger puzzle. Contemporary philosopher Noel Carroll took this stance, arguing that an artist's intentions are relevant to their audience the same way a speaker's intentions are relevant to the person they're engaging in conversation. To understand how intentions function in conversation, Carroll said to imagine someone holding a cigarette and asking for a match. You respond by handing them a lighter, gathering that their motivation is to light their cigarette. The words they use to ask the question are important, but the intentions behind the question dictate your understanding and ultimately your response. So which end of this spectrum do you lean towards? Do you, like Wimsatt and Beardsley, believe that when it comes to art, the proof should be in the pudding? Or do you think that an artist's plans and motivations for their work affect its meaning? Artistic interpretation is a complex web that will probably never offer a definitive answer. Did you know that TED-Ed has a program dedicated to sharing?
All right, I'm going to try to get back to where I was earlier. Okay, there we go. So when we're talking about what art means, where do you think that meaning lies? And I would just like to get a couple different people's perspectives. Do you agree that it's all on you as the viewer, or do you agree that it's all on the artist? Or do you agree, or do you believe that it's somewhere in the middle?
I personally feel like it's the bridge between the two. Both sides are important to think about because like you'll see something, think something, and then hearing about it can just make it even more unique to think about in that middle ground.
No, I think that's, I really like that. I think that art doesn't have, in general, one meaning. I think the meaning varies and grows with everybody that encounters it, everybody that had a hand in it, and wherever it's been placed, whatever the context are that it goes through. There's a guy named Ibn Khaldun who's one of my favorite philosophers. He's the fairy godfather of museum curators, essentially. One of the things, and he's a, I believe he's a 13th century Muslim philosopher. One of the things he said was that none of us live by ourselves. All of us live as if we're swimming through or walking through a river. And the water pressing around us are not just the impacts of our own actions, but they're also the impacts of the actions around, of everybody around us, the people before us, the people after us. And he called it living in a river of ghosts. And I really like that. He also talked about how an object may be intended or be meant for one thing, but when somebody finds it and takes it home, the meaning changes. And when somebody else finds it and gives it away to some different person, the meaning changes again. And if you put it on a pedestal and have it in an environment where people walk by and look at it, then it means something else entirely. You know, for every audience, it has different meanings. And I think that when we start looking at some of this stuff, those are really good ideas to have rattling around in your brain, because we may come to something that looks to us horrifying and terrible. And then when we find out what the artist's intention is, or the context, or the the culture that the artist was working in, or the culture that repurposed whatever the thing is, our perspective can change. And I totally agree. I think it was Cassandra who said that the real meaning is somewhere along that bridge that connects the viewer to the original artist. You know, how are you encountering it? And when we're looking at things like the Standard of Ur, for example, or the gates of Ishtar, I believe it was, or we look at funerary devices for the Egyptians, or we look at Etruscan tombs, or any of that sort of thing, we're looking at it very far away from the original intent of whoever made it. And as we look at Mesoamerican stuff, you know, there is quite a bit of a timeline that we're looking at, and we are going to be overlapping a lot of different stuff. But as we look at this kind of thing, it's really important to remember that the people that made it had a worldview that was so far removed from our own, there's a good chance we don't even recognize it. And so the things that we are thinking mean one thing or another may not mean that at all. And I think that's, and it could also mean exactly what we think. And I think as viewers of this kind of art, it's important to remember that we are really responsible for helping generate meaning as well, you know, as viewers. And I think part of that means being brave enough to educate ourselves. When we come across something that looks despicable, be brave enough to step back and think, well, why am I offended by this? I'm offended because I have the sensibilities of somebody who was born fairly recently, not of somebody who was born 2,000 years ago. You know, and I just think that it's important to have those thoughts rattling around in our head. So this, I would like you to click on some of these things. This is the area of the world that we're looking at for the most part. But it is also important to remember that this is the timeline that we're looking at. Now, I have a friend who, he's a Maya translator, and he knows a lot about the Maya Empire. And so when I talk about dates, the dates that we're looking at are the generally accepted dates, not necessarily the actual dates. History is fluid, it changes as we learn more about different things. So it is really good to remember that. And we're also talking about time periods where there's evidence of people being in the Americas. I mentioned Kennewick Man. Have any of you ever heard of Kennewick Man? I grew up about 8 miles away from where Kennewick Man was discovered. And it's commonly believed that around the tail end of the last ice age, people started finding their way to the Americas, going across the Alaskan bridge there between Siberia and North America. And as people are looking around at different things, there's more and more information that shows that human beings, just like every other life form on the planet, will find a way to live there, wherever there is. And there is evidence in the Smithsonian that people carried rock with them from Europe and walked across the ice bridges in the North Atlantic. There is evidence that people were walking around in New Mexico almost 20,000 years ago. So the thing that makes Kennewick Man so fascinating is that his body is at least 9,000 years old. And when they did forensic reconstruction, he looked very Polynesian. And that just opens up a whole case of cans of worms for a lot of people that think they got everything, that they know everything. And the oldest mummies in the world were actually made by that people that lived in the Chinchorro region in Chile and Peru before the Egyptians, thousands of years before the Egyptians. So, I want you to think about that for a sec. And these are some of the areas that we're looking at right here. There's Mexico here, Honduras, Nicaragua, Yucatan. And what's fascinating about these people is it would be so nice to think that these people all lived specifically in these areas and that's where they stayed. But like I said, I mentioned my friend who knows an awful lot about the Maya. The Maya actually settled. If you can see my mouse, can anybody see where my mouse is? Right on Florida, right here.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, and then there's also Georgia right here. The Maya really liked this particular blue dye that was found in natural deposits all around the Yucatan Peninsula. But they used so much of it that they actually started making ships and sailing. And there is actually evidence showing that they founded a couple colonies in Florida, right about where my arrow is, and in Georgia to mine some more of that blue dye. So, think about that for a second. That's how far the Maya went in search of the blue dye that they loved. And if that's true just for the Maya, I wonder how true it is for these other, their contemporaries. So that's something else to think about. The Maya, most textbooks will state that the Maya civilization started at about 600 BC. There's actually lots of evidence to show that it was begun 1,000 years earlier. Maya was a very ancient culture. And some of the other cultures that we're going to be looking at is the Olmecs, where there's evidence of their stuff all over the place. They were considered to be the mother civilization of a lot of these cultures. There's it says approximate limits of high Mesoamerican culture. That's where evidence of a lot of these guys' work had shown up. There's even copper work that looks like it was made by the Aztecs that showed up in Montana, of all places. Anybody want to hazard a guess as to why the Yucatan Peninsula is named Yucatan? I won't keep you in suspense. This actually comes from the journals of one of the Spanish monks that were trying to translate for the conquistadors. They went to this area, the Yucatan Peninsula, and talked to whoever could talk to them. Finally, getting to the point where they could start going back and forth. The Spanish monks learned Quiche Maya, and the Mayans learned Spanish, and they were finally able to start talking. But when the monks and the conquistadors first showed up, they were asking everybody as best they could, "What do you call this place?" And the word they kept hearing was Yucatan, Yucatan, Yucatan. So I thought, okay, well, it's Yucatan. That's what we'll call it. After the monks finally were able to engage in their own language with the people that were there, they asked them, well, what is the name of this place really? And they were told. I can't remember what the actual name is. And one of these monks wrote down, he said he was really surprised. He said, well, why were you telling us it was called Yucatan? And the Maya said, oh, no, we never said that. Well, you guys were trying to talk to us. We tried to get you to say it louder or be more clear. Yucatan is actually Maya for what? I thought that was pretty funny. So the Olmec, they're the oldest culture, or evidently the oldest. They don't seem to have an awful lot of written language. The Maya, they had libraries full. When the Spanish came, they had libraries full of books. And as the conquistadors were trying to tear them down so that they could be colonized, and the Spanish monks were just doing the conquistadors' orders, the books were burned. More and more of the books were burned until the most literate society of North and South America was reduced from cities that were libraries down to 4 surviving books, if you can imagine that. 4 books. The Aztec, they were another prolific society. Lots of records from them. Most of the stuff that you see is their writing, and their writing is just everywhere, and it all revolves around these gods that require human blood to continue making the universe work. So everything revolves around human blood sacrifice for the Aztecs. Because there isn't a lot of written material left by the Olmecs, a lot of people make assumptions because of their artifacts and where their artifacts were found. And that's pretty much all we can do. But what is really fascinating is that one of the big things that the Olmecs did is create these monumental heads. And it seems like there are almost what's the word? Heraldic devices on their heads. And since these stones are incredibly hard, very difficult to work with, that would mean that sculptors would have to work for a long time to make these heads. So it seems like it's a reasonable conclusion. These people are wearing these apparently symbolic headdresses, and these heads are the primary thing that survives. There's a good chance that these heads are of rulers of the Olmecs. And what is really fascinating is these heads seem to have facial features that could potentially be attributed to different families. But the problem is, because the Olmecs were they disappeared without leaving any sort of written trace, and other people, as a mark of their strength or power, would find these heads and move them into their palaces, move them into different areas. There's really not very many, if any, Olmec heads that survive in the original site that they were. So, how do you practice semiotics? How do you practice contextualization where you have no idea where these things originally were found or originally made? It just, I think that is really sad. But I would like you very much go through and look at these videos. Watch as many of them as you can. Some of these are going to be videos. Some of these are going to be articles. This is an article that shows. Sorry about all the ads. But this talks a lot about the colossal heads that the Olmecs had, and then there's sculptures like this that are showing up. There's that wrestler that we looked at, or he's called a wrestler. This to me, it looked like it's a little kid who's wearing some sort of fancy headdress or a helmet of some sort. I think looks like to me that he's either sucking on his finger or picking his nose, and the finger broke off. But this is, I believe that this is carved out of ivory, which if you can get this level of detail, this thing is only a couple inches tall. That really means, I think, more than anything else, you know what you're doing. I think that's pretty fantastic. But there's a lot of detail. Looks like a happy, chubby kid to me who's just minding his own business. And one of the reasons why they think that this is Olmec is just because that's how old they think it is, pretty much. Now, like I did say that the Maya overlapped. The Maya go back potentially to 1600 BC. And so there is potentially a lot of overlap between them and the Olmecs. And I do think that they probably did talk to each other. But that is just supposition on my part. They shared a lot of space. And what's interesting to me is when you look at one of these faces, or you look at the Olmec, the giant heads, you can see facial features that seem to come from around the world, but also you'll see artistic tropes, visual tropes, for lack of a better word, that seem to carry over into what the Maya did artistically, and then also seem to influence the Aztecs too. Now, some of these, does this make you think of any other culture that we looked at? What I think is fascinating is this is made out of jade, which is a very hard stone. It's also a precious stone. We talked about the Chinese, the Shang Dynasty had that one mummy that was surrounded by jade, little jade pieces, and it was a whole suit made out of jade. Jade is a really fantastic material because it will stay cool forever. It doesn't matter where you put it. If it's in sunlight, yes, it'll heat up for a little bit. The second you move it into shade, it will cool down again. And the color is fantastic. It just ranges from white all the way to yellow, orange, green, and then into black. So there is quite a color range. What's fascinating is if you have a sculptor who's good enough that can actually polish it, it feels amazing. It feels unreal. And what I'm looking at is I'm looking at this and I see some facial features that remind me a lot of some of the stuff that we saw last week, particularly with some of the Qin artwork. And we know that our ancestors were smart and they could show people if they wanted to, just the way they were. And so I wonder, is this how Olmecs looked? Or is this a slight exaggeration of features to show what the beautiful features were? Were they trying to make somebody more beautiful? And I look at this. This reminds me of some of the little baby sculptures we saw from the Han Dynasty or the Han Dynasty. And I just think it's really interesting. Are these people showing how they actually looked, or did they interact with somebody who looked like that, or is this an expression of the features that they think are beautiful? And I just think it's fascinating. I don't know if there's any way to know for sure. But I think, on this, having this kind of Cupid's bow mouth might be a very beautiful feature. Maybe having eyes like this, maybe this is a mark that they are really intelligent or really smart. Having a head shape like this, maybe that means something. Maybe this is the hairstyle that everybody was expected to wear. But again, and on some of these things, particularly when you're looking at artifacts from cultures that were colonized by Europeans. And I'm saying this specifically because we can see that this is being changed every few years, is that there are assumptions about dates that may or may not be accurate. And I say that because I look at, for artwork that was found in Nigeria and Mali by English colonizers in the 19th century, were thought to be relatively recent, like within the last 100 years. And the bronzes that were found were thought to have been created by a lost culture that was only a couple hundred years old. As those bronze sculptures made their way to the British museums and have been the subject of a lot more scrutiny and scholarship over the last 50 years, every 10 years, that date goes back in time. Until now, the most recent studies recognize that these Nigerian bronzes are actually predate the Renaissance by well over 1,000 years. So when we see dates like this, I think it's fair to say that it's a broad range because people really don't know, and they could be a lot older. So that's, like I said, Maya, from my friend who is an archaeologist and has been studying the Maya for about 50 years, their culture is about 1,000 years old than most of the articles that you'll see about them. Anyway, I just think that this is really fascinating stuff. Okay, so I do recommend that go back and watch. This is what I just clicked on, was the Apollo magazine, Stone Cold Masterpiece, Art of the Olmecs. Look at several of these. I would say look at the Olmec legacy, look at the Olmec mask, and ancient artifacts might be a good one. But definitely look at the Olmec are more than just big heads. Definitely look at that as well. Now, this is one of my favorite plaques, and there's some mysteries about it that I think people still haven't adequately resolved. And I believe that there's a couple reasons for that. One is, this is the sarcophagus lid for a guy named Hanapakal II. He was a ruler of a Mayan city, and he ruled. He died towards the end of the 10th century, so we're talking about 900 and something. But he ruled as a king for at least 85 years. And if you think about the idea that, and this is Hanapakal right here. If you think about the idea that rulers come in to power usually when they're a teenager or older, this guy could have been conceivably about 100 years old when he died. Now, this kind of a thing is very hard to understand. If we look at it, we don't have any access to any other information. We only see this by itself. This looks to me like it's a guy leaning back in a recliner. And his hands, I don't know if he's fiddling with knobs or if he's doing some sort of a dance. I have no idea. But I look at all this stuff around it. I mean, these look almost like TV screens. It just looks weird, super weird.
Ancient Alien says that he's riding a spaceship or space shuttle, and also compares it to Egyptian tablets that have similar spaceships.
Yeah, and that is something that I think I'm glad you pointed that out, because I do include a little bit of this Mayan spaceflight and Hana Pakal's lid. The city is Palenque. This is a sculpture that somebody made, assuming that he's in a spaceship. And I wanted to kind of go over a little bit of the visuals on this and provide some context so that you guys don't buy into the idea that it's a spaceship. Believe what you want. And I love that episode of Ancient Aliens, but again, I think it's kind of silly. And
When it's on there, it kind of takes away any of the validity, but it does show cool stuff on there.
yes, definitely. And one of the things that I think is kind of funny is the ancient alien people that they talk to. The thing that supports their ideas is based on taking things out of cultural and historical context. So for the Maya, first off, the kings and queens of the Maya, their emperors and empresses, were also believed to be manifestations of the divine. And they were manifestations of aspects of the divine, which means that they did believe that there were gods that lived who had thrones in the skies and around the planet, but they also believed that all those gods were not necessarily separate individuals. They could very well be visual aspects or visible aspects of the same entity somehow. And that Hanapakal, as a king, as a ruler, was not just a king, but he was also part of the divine that chose that moment in time to live on the planet and express the will of the greater divine. Okay, so he's also a deity in addition to being a human being, but he's also part of this deity that manifests itself as different faces, which I think is interesting. This is a really fascinating concept to me of the divine. So it's not so much one God who's a father God as it is one God that is a network of other beings that are all manifestations of facets of the one God. And if you don't understand that, that's fine. You don't need to. But it comes down to Hanapakal is every bit as much of the creator of the world as he is the king. Now, this shape right here is an interesting device. In a lot of Mayan art, we see this is how trees are depicted. You have a central trunk. These are different aspects that could be textures of the trunk, but they could also be textures of the trunk that mean numbers and other symbols. So, it can be easily be both. These little dots that are held to the trunk by these little upside down Y shapes are also branches, and they could be berries or fruit. They could be, maybe not, who knows? This right here, this curl is actually a branch with leaves on it. These little square shapes, these little odd arrowhead shapes, those are leaves as well. So this is actually a tree, but it's not just any tree. A tree this magnificent is actually the world tree the Norse called it Yggdrasil, but it is the world tree that represents the initiation of all life on the planet. And notice where it's growing from. It's not growing out of this. This is a throne for Hanapakal. This tree is growing out of Hanapakal as well as next to him, which shows that he is part of the tree as well as originating from the tree. And he is the originator of the tree. So this is just in that little bit right there, it shows that Hanapakal is both the king and a manifestation of the divine. When we look around, we can see different things like this shape right here looks really weird, but this shape on both sides is the world dragon that's also known as Quetzalcoatl is one of his names. But it's not just a dragon. It is this idea, this concept of a bridge to the gods as well. And you can also see there's stylized faces coming out of the mouth of this dragon or Quetzalcoatl. So it's life or other kings coming out of the mouth of the bridge of the gods. And, so yeah, it's weird, it's odd, it's all that. But I hope you understand that it is quite a bit more grounded than a spaceship. And things like this, in this kind of a context, if we're talking about the world tree and we're talking about gods and the bridge to heaven, what do you think this could possibly mean? This shape right here.
Is it like a religious symbol, like a cross? I'm not very versed in religious symbols.
I like that. It could represent that. And what's interesting, the Spanish monks could not understand why the Maya had trees that were shaped like Christian crosses. They didn't get that, like this center shape right here. They thought that St. Thomas the Apostle on one of his missions was blown across the Atlantic Ocean and taught the early Maya about the Bible. And that's why they had the snake and the tree and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, that's a really good guess. And this does become a religious symbol. But in this instance, it also represents a star or the sun, something that ties into looking into heaven. And there's lots of other stuff that's going around. These kind of things right here, these coils, these are clouds. This kind of, and then this right here, we see these are eye sockets, and this is a lower jaw. This is a skull, and it represents, so we look down here, we have a sky going around something that is a throne set on a skull that represents the passing of life. We see a symbol like this is a celestial symbol. It could be the sun or a star. We see the world tree that is growing, that is connecting to the gods. We see Quetzalcoatl opening their mouth and other gods coming out of their mouth. What we are looking at is essentially a depiction of the dying and rebirthing of Hanapakal in heaven, returning to his home, that where he came down from, the abode of the gods. We're seeing that the passage is a passage through death into a new life, living in heaven, and he is living in an eternal realm where all the gods dwell. Is this making a little bit more sense looking at all this kind of stuff?
Yes, it does. It tells a story.
Yeah, it tells a story. It's not, and I am really sorry for the people whose feelings are hurt by this. It is not an astronaut, driving a spaceship into the sky. And I'm sorry. I don't want to say it's not that. I'll say I don't know everything. Maybe there's some of that, but there's a big part of me that doubts it extremely. But by looking at a couple of the things and finding out just a couple of what the things mean, this is actually a celebration. Hanapakal's family is telling the world, yes, our father's dead, but since he's a god and he's part of heaven, that's where he's going back to. He's going back to heaven. He's going to live with the people that also represent God. and he's responsible for everything that we see around us because he's connected with what's responsible for making the whole universe, which means we aren't saying goodbye to grandpa or dad. What we are saying is now he's actively around us everywhere, and we can see him all the time, every day, whenever we open our eyes. I think that's pretty beautiful. But it is very different than, when we start seeing some of the things that provide context. Suddenly things mean something very different. Now, one of the other things that I see is showing up is, yes, the Maya built pyramids. And this was used for a long time to as big foam finger air quotes, as proof that Egyptians colonized Central America. Believe it or not, people actually believe that. There's a couple issues about this. This is about half to a third of the age of what people assume the age of the Egyptian pyramids are. The angles are different. Egyptian pyramids, if you can imagine this, Egyptian pyramids originally, those pyramids were highly polished, the Great Pyramids, and the top, very top of it, it was capped with incredibly polished stone. Some people believed it was covered with gold. And so when the sun was right overhead, they were almost impossible to look at because it shone light, it reflected light everywhere. If you were within sight distance of the Egyptian pyramids, you could see them, and it would almost be blinding from about 11 o'clock until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Now this is very different. There's a lot of stairs, and at the top of this, instead of meant to reflect light, the top of these temples are actually temple structures. There's something that happens inside of here, and there's lots of art where people across the valley could see that they in the same kind of way there were these things that would tell stories. There were imagery that could communicate what this represented. The reality is almost every culture that built stuff, one of their principal architectural structures was a pyramid, because a pile of rock or debris is one of the easiest things to build. And we'll find out about this when we see the Cahokia civilization, the Mississippians in North America. And then one way to give that meaning is to put sides on the mound so that it points to north, south, east, and west, and then do things that help you to see a very concrete relation between this building as a spiritual structure and the environment around it. So almost every culture has built pyramids, and that's from Zimbabwe and South America to North America, Russia, and China. They're everywhere. Which would be so cool if it did prove that aliens helped our ancestors, but sadly, I don't know if that's the case. I would also highly recommend watching this video as well. But you can see this is another Maya pyramid. When we compare that to this pyramid here, what are some of the things that you see right away that are different? Look at this pyramid and look at this pyramid.
The first one is a lot taller and skinnier.
Yes.
And the second one kind of looks like it has a channel.
It looks like it has a what?
Like a channel for water. Or is that like the staircase up to the top of it?
Yeah. Yeah. So right away we can see that, yeah, they're both building pyramids, but they're very different. This is in Tikal, and I can't remember where this is. This might be Palenque. I'm not sure, but they are in different areas, but they're in areas that are ruled by different god kings, and their functions are probably going to be potentially similar. But this little area here, it's a tiny closet-sized room. The footprint of this is not really big. It takes a lot of energy to climb up these stairs to the top. Here, the stairs are not nearly as steep. Probably is a little bit easier to get up there. And this is quite a bit bigger room. So yeah, maybe there are a lot of things that are similar, but I think you can tell very different people with different thoughts made them. And it's interesting because the architecture varies with who the ruling family is and who their family uh, depictions of God are. You know what sometimes it's going to be Tlaloc, who's the god of rain. Sometimes it's going to be Quetzalcoatl. Sometimes it's going to be somebody totally different. But it's interesting because we can identify with some idea just by looking at the context of the structure that maybe these guys it was had a different purpose for their pyramid than the other guys. Maybe it's the same, but definitely their gods. They had different ways of worshiping different gods. And again, for Maya, the gods that they worshipped, that is a facet of divinity because they're all part of the same God. And what is really interesting to me is you see the same kind of thing going on with the Maya as you saw with the Han Dynasty, which is this very strong belief that since the rulers were God, then when they won, it was because God willed it. And if they lost, it was because God didn't want them to win and God was withdrawing their support, essentially. And so remember the divine right of kings we talked about with the Han? This is an idea that keeps showing up quite a bit, which I think is really interesting. So this shows a layout of a city, you know, some of the things. And some of these cities were huge, tens of thousands of people. And what you don't see a lot of the time is that these are built in areas that are not really suitable for a lot of people living around. Like here, a city, you know, in the US, we're used to cities being in areas where transportation comes together. We're used to cities being in areas where maybe there's a lot of food nearby, a lot of resources, or a lot of ability to get those resources into the city. And what's interesting is that for the Maya, it seemed like the cities were built somewhere and then they would build the routes to them. They would make the rivers they would make the canals, they would make the roads to the city. It wasn't that the city grew up in a crossroads. It was they would build the cities first and then get a way of getting people and food to them. I just think that that's really fascinating. Then we see some of the palaces. Does this remind you of anybody's architecture that you've seen in the US?
No.
Have you guys ever heard of Frank Lloyd Wright?
No.
Okay. I'm going to look up Frank Lloyd Wright. He is one of the first truly American architects. And he developed a style called prairie style. And here's some of his buildings. And then we start looking at things like the Roby House.
Oh, so this is kind of like a modernist.
Yes, exactly. He was really popular from about 1920 to about 1960. So, you know, very much more
Okay.
modern. But a lot of his stuff, he went on a trip to the Yucatan, looked at a lot of the Tlaloc-inspired Mayan architecture. And when he got back from his trip, that informed everything he did. And I love that because what that means is this truly American architect was drawing inspiration from other early American architects. I think that's pretty cool. He wasn't trying to Europeanize anything. He was celebrating his architectural ancestry in Mesoamerica. I think that's fantastic. Where you look at this is called, I can't remember which ranch or which building this is, but look at those structures right across there. And then if we go back to this in Uxmal, you can really see that the Tlaloc architecture there and how that inspired what Frank Lloyd Wright was doing 3,000 years or 2,000 years later. Can you guys see that? These little
I can see
things right
the
there?
inspiration.
Yeah, he didn't copy it; it inspired him. If you guys next time you guys go up north to Utah County, you can go to the Harold Bealey Library on BYU campus, and that was inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright, but it was inspired directly from his trips to the Yucatan.
Would that count as one of our projects?
Yeah, yeah. If you want to go there and do that, that'd be awesome. Okay, I'd like to see if I can get this to work. I want to show you what Mayan cities might have actually looked like. And these are like animated reproductions or animated reconstructions, really. So these things were not just blank stone. Like we looked at with the Greeks and Romans and the Etruscans and stuff, a lot of their things were painted. And, you see a lot of red. What's interesting to me is a lot of people just associate all the Mesoamericans with human sacrifice. And for 2,000 years, the Mayans did practice blood sacrifice, but it was burning the blood of the royal family. And it was not lethal. It was never intended to be lethal. They would cut themselves. The royal family would. They would cut themselves and burn their blood as a way of connecting with those aspects of their own divinity that were in heaven. And the smoke would carry that blood up to heaven. And that's how everybody knew that their prayers would be heard. So it was only the royal family that would burn their human blood. And it was only little bits at a time. They would typically take droplets of blood, put it on paper that were inscribed with the prayers, and burn that paper. And the smoke would carry those prayers into heaven along with the royal blood that was also divine blood. So basically, the God on earth in a mortal body was praying to other aspects of himself that lived in heaven. And so red is a very important color because it represents the sacrifice. Now, what's fascinating to me is that the Mayans did not start practicing human sacrifice where they would actually kill people and burn the blood. They didn't start practicing that until right before, about 80 years before the Spanish started showing up. And it marked the complete collapse of the Mayan culture as this incredibly industrious civilization. I just think that's really sad. Can you guys see these images of what this might have looked like?
So were they like painted, or was it just
Yeah.
the materials that they used were colored?
Yeah, they would be painting a lot of red ochre, which is red stone that you pound into a powder, and then a lot of that blue dye that was like almost like a colored chalk that they would use. And then here's the handsome narrator. So yeah, definitely look at as many of those as you can. Look at those. And the Maya writing, this is the last thing I want to look at before we go to the Aztecs. Maya, like I said, they were the most literate civilization in North and South America. They had more books, they wrote more books, they had a longer history than anybody else because of their writing. And you can see their writing is pretty fantastical. I mean, these kinds of things, and this is from a friend of mine who is a Maya, Quiche Maya translator. He said that what is really frustrating for people that are trying to translate the Mayan language is that the only people that were writing were the people that had this divine and royal blood in them, or nobles who were right next door to them. Noble and royal is not the same thing. Usually nobles have some of the royal blood in them. They could, but the royal family is basically the ones that are right around the throne, and then the nobles are a step removed. But these guys, since they had little, bits of the divine blood in them, I imagine that they didn't have to do a lot of work for their living. So they thought of ways to kind of chew up their time. That's the only way I can explain what's going on with the Mayan language. The Mayan language, they do have letters. They do have shapes that make specific phonetic sounds that are not designed necessarily to be letters. And they have rebuses or whole drawings that are designed to either tell stories or show you objects. And what this means, they would mix this all together. So when you're reading, some of the times the only way it makes sense is if you read it out loud and you hear what the sounds make, and then you know what they're trying to say. And sometimes the letters that they would write weren't necessarily for the specific words. You would read those letters out that as a word didn't make any sense, but when you read them out loud, they sounded kind of like something that would rhyme with another word that was the word that they was supposed to be meaning. Or if you saw a writing or drawing of a scene or something, you would have to know what the scene was about. Who are the people depicted in the scene? What are they doing? And then when you say that out loud, that would sound like the word it's supposed to be. And you can see that very quickly it becomes very frustrating to translate. But that's what the Maya like to do. I think they were all really super geniuses. Can you imagine trying to turn in anything like that and get credit for it, where the only way a teacher could possibly understand it is by guessing what you're talking about and then saying that out loud and trying to think of what words that could rhyme with, and then that's what you're trying to say? Yeah, it's frustrating. But the Maya also had incredibly advanced math. This right here is a number, and it's actually 13. One horizontal band or vertical. One horizontal band is 5, two horizontal bands is 10, and then you have the 3 dots. And if you're, let's see, I'm going to go back to this other thing right here. So this is this image right here. Can you guys see Hanna Bacall in his deathbed?
Yes.
Okay. This right here represents the sun or a star, but it is also one of the symbols for zero. The Maya were one of the very few cultures that left a record showing that they understood what zero could mean and that they used it. So the Romans with all their stuff didn't really come to the idea of what a zero was. So, that's just an indication of brain power, I think. Now I want to talk about somebody else. These guys freak me out a lot, the Aztecs. And, the Maya civilization began to collapse because they didn't trust each other, and and a big part of what hastened the collapse is their use of human sacrifice. Because, if everybody is scared to show up anywhere because they know there's a good chance that they might get killed just for being there, people are not going to want to stick around in cities. People aren't going to want to talk to each other. You're just going to want to go and hide in the hills. And I think that in large part explains why the Maya civilization fell apart in those 2 or 3 generations leading up to the conquistadors showing up. Now, this is an example of something from an Aztec codex that became indicative. Well, they were the only things that really survived Aztec literary pursuits. And these are books that are just filled with depictions of different gods, what kind of sacrifices the gods needed, how to kill people properly so that you could get their blood or the body parts that the god needed to consume, and who was responsible for doing the killing. So in this, this is a warrior, and he's a person that is very, and I'll tell you why I know it's a man, but it's a warrior who was defeated in battle. We know that because his hands are bound. And we know that he comes from a really good family because he's wearing this kind of thing right there. Now, captives were taken by their hair. And so one of the marks of being a good warrior is having long hair. And one of the marks of being impressive in your society is wearing something that you were taunting your enemy to grab. So, you'd have headdresses like this. Now this, I'm pretty sure this is blood coming out of his mouth, showing that he's been defeated and he's due to be sacrificed. Now this is one of the warrior maiden priestesses that the Aztecs had. They did show up on the battlefield. This is an example of a warrior club, and she has a brace of spears or a couple spears. How do I know that this is a woman?
There is a breast.
Right. We see a breast right there. So the Aztecs had warrior women whose jobs were to be on the battlefield, sometimes carry spears, sometimes fight themselves, and to be there basically as berserkers to freak the enemies out. Okay. And down here, this is a depiction of the flayed god, who is a god that all of his skin was removed, and that's how he looks at like all the time. Earlier iteration is the scab god. He was considered one of the ugliest gods in an earlier iteration of his mythology, but he is one of the gods who's primarily responsible for making the sun burn. And essentially, through the suffering that is related to him is how one of the ways the sun stays alive. And you can tell because of the coloring of his skin, there's flaps of skin that are hanging loose right here. He's carrying a knife right here. She has a club. There's a handle, and there's a little thingamajig coming out here. We have a pretty good idea this is a knife because the tip is red. And this is a skull head, which normal people don't do. This is a good indication that he's a god. And then this is, of course, a head of a sacrifice. I don't think it's the same person, but it might be. And then this, I believe, is either another god or a priest who's dedicating himself to the service of the god. So, or this could be a king or a priest king. A lot of the times they blended functions. So you're pretty ruthless, but this is what a lot of Aztec art revolves around, is the sacrifice of human blood and hearts and body parts to gods that survive, essentially through the sacrifices that must be done to get that blood flowing. Now this website, History Crunch, it does show some of the things, like here's some Toltec stuff. We talked about Olmecs rather than Toltecs. It's another one of the cultures in Mesoamerica. This is Tlaloc is the name of this god. I mentioned him before. He's the god of rain. He's a Mayan god that was co-opted by the Aztecs. But you always know it's him because of these things that I think look like goggles. And the Maya depictions of Tlaloc generally don't have big fangs like that. And here we see, a lot of this imagery is disturbing, like snakes eating people. Well, a giant snake might not necessarily eat people. Because of these representing feathers, we have a pretty good idea that this is Quetzalcoatl. And the fact that he's eating somebody rather than a head emerging from his mouth means that he's probably consuming a sacrifice of some sort, which probably has more to do with being that they killed somebody to sacrifice them for the idea that's Quetzalcoatl. And this disturbing imagery, it is disturbing to us because people will wear masks that look like skulls and things like that. Well, in this cultural context, it is intended to look disturbing. it seems that these people thrived on the idea that the folks that they were sacrificing needed to be frightened of them. They needed to be terrified. That's part and parcel of what made the sacrifice delicious to the gods. Dying in pain, dying in fright. But there are, I don't know how accurate the numbers were, that the monks would record how many human sacrifices were slaughtered by the Aztec priests. But there are depictions of people trying to walk up the stairs of some of these Aztec temples, and they couldn't because it was so slippery with blood, human blood. Of course, the Aztecs are the ones who built Mexico City. And then the Spanish changed Mexico City so that it followed the diagram of the city of heaven. And we'll talk about that at another time. But this talks about the Cayohuatl stone or Huaki stone. And I would definitely watch this video and learn about this. This stone has a depiction of a deity, and this is a female deity who has power over life. You can tell that because she's holding a skull right here. And there's some other things going on that we can talk about. Right here, this is a depiction of feathers. So I'm thinking that she's probably related to either a concept of Quetzalcoatl, who is that feathered serpent, or these feathers represent that she has power related to the sky that would probably unite her with a deity, and she might be, she's most likely not a priestess. She is probably a goddess. Now, this is where Mexico City is built, and we're going to get past this ad. Okay. This is the city Chinampas that was the capital of the Aztec Empire. And if you can imagine, the Aztecs are constantly getting in wars with the people around them because it's kind of a dumb idea to kill your own people that are providing food for you and doing your gardening, stuff like that. So the Aztecs did not only get into wars where they fought people to capture human sacrifice victims or human sacrifices, but they would also make treaties with other cultures around them who would also go further afield for human bodies to sacrifice. It kind of makes sense that they would build their capital city in the middle of a lake and create an environment that was very difficult to attack. So you'd have these causeways, so it made it very difficult for ships to sneak up on them. You have limited number of roads, which meant you could easily defend yourself, and it was suicidal, for other people to try attacking you. But all these little squares that you see in this map are actually man-made islands. And not floating islands like in Lake Titicaca, but these are islands that were built actually by dumping basketfuls of dirt on the same area over and over again until you build up a landmass. And what is fantastic about this, engineering-wise, is that they were so efficient at using these kinds of manufactured land resources, creating their own arable land from the middle of the lake, that they could feed 200,000 people. To put that in perspective, 200,000, I think if you combined all the population of southern Utah, I don't know if you get quite to there. Maybe you would. That's a lot of people. And the Aztec Empire could do it. So definitely watch that video. Let's see. And I wanted to share. I want to share this really quick too. You'll see the word codex or codices quite a bit. The difference between a book and a codex or codice is that books, as we use that term now, are commonly referring to written word that is bound on one edge of the page. So you have a spine with pages coming out and usually in one direction. A codex is actually a long strip of paper that is pleated like an accordion fold, so that the book itself may only be 4 inches across and 6 inches tall and a couple inches thick. But when you grab one of the pages and pull it out, you'll be able to make a long line of paper because it's all folded up like an accordion. And I'll show you a picture of one. Can you see that? This is what a codex is. It's basically paper that's folded in an accordion.
So it's like a little book.
Yeah, exactly. It's just another way of binding a book, essentially. So I did want to look at, we only have a couple minutes left. Let's see. I want to just go through, first off, do you guys have, I really want to have you guys go through as many of those videos, click on all those links, see what catches your fancy, and just find stuff that's interesting with those three cultures, Olmec, Maya, and Aztec. And I think you can really, I would like a couple of people, if you're up to the challenge, do a weekly reflection on a piece of art from each of those three cultures and see if you can find how they relate visually. Because I think we can really see how the Maya and Aztec relate to each other visually, but it'd be interesting to see if you can find stuff that link the Olmec to the Maya. So who is here that has been able to turn in the research project number 2?
I've turned mine in.
Okay.
I have as well.
All right, great. Anybody else?
Yes, I did too.
Okay. Could you guys tell me about your projects? Cassandra, would you mind? I know I'm putting you guys on the spot. Could you just spend a minute talking about your project?
Yeah, I don't think we should watch it. Mine was long, and after I finished recording, I was like, that was too long. But mine was going through all of the different sculptures and some paintings of the animals in the Indus Valley art.
Okay, very cool. And you were able to find quite a few examples, weren't you?
I found a book that was written in like the 90s, and they had a bunch they linked elsewhere, and so I had like a plethora of things to go through that I found.
That's excellent. That's wonderful. Because one of the things that's frustrating about the Indus Valley people is that the little bit that survives is beautiful, but nobody has been able to find anything that represents like a receipt or a book or anything like that, or a regular inscription, just those little stamps that we talked about. So yeah, that's really cool. You were able to find so many examples of animals. Zach, could you tell us a little bit about what your project was on?
Was kind of like the history of tattooing prior to 1300. And I
Very
did a video of a tattoo that I did, like a time lapse, but that only turned out to be like a minute and a half long. So I kind of adjusted it through TikTok on the speed of it, and then added a couple like the tools that they were using in Egypt, who was getting the tattoos at the time. I had the idea after we learned about ARTH, and so I wanted to see like if it was a tribal or cultural thing, or what I could learn about like why we make the decision to get tattoos. So I learned that I talk really slow and strange, or strange to hear back to myself.
I think that's true
And
of everybody.
I trimmed all the uhs and the like long pauses and weird me reading and try to trim a bunch of it off. So it was like fun learning process.
Very cool. That's excellent. And Lindsay, what was your project on?
So my project was a discovery project recreating a clay goddess sculpture as seen in the Indus Valley civilizations like found in Harappa.
Okay,
When I did my weekly reflection, I felt kind of connected to that and the individuality that I think went into a lot of those sculptures. So I made my own woman.
oh, excellent. Very cool. I want to try to open this up so we can see it.
I think my pictures are kind of small. I don't know how clearly you'll be able to see her
Okay, I can
in that
expand it.
last one.
Right, okay,
It was kind of a struggle to like break off such small pieces of clay to like overlay them to get like the distinct shapes of like her jewelry. But
very cool.
she's got a
No,
little
that
headdress.
what's that?
I said she's got a little headdress and
Yeah,
a
I
little
see that
belt.
right up here. And a fashionable belt. That's excellent. Very cool. Yeah, I like that because each of you did something that was completely different. None of you did the same thing. And I love seeing that, because everybody's is different.
I really like that clay thing that you did. It's fun that we just learned about that and to see a little version of that's a cool idea.
Yeah, and I love the fact that Lindsay did that and Cassandra, she did a focus on the animals from the same area. That's really cool. That's exciting to me too. So very, very neat. And another thing I'm seeing is that people will do the same kind of subject, but their takes on it are completely unique. And I want to, I'm out of time, but I did want to mention for everybody who's watching this, several people have submitted their project, but they have not submitted it to the discussion. And this is where everybody else can see what you do too. So please, if you and several people have turned in their project that they did not submit, please remember to submit it to the discussion so everybody else can see it too. All right. All right, folks. I really appreciate you guys showing up today and being part of this. I am aware that I'm going over a little bit. Again, I'm very glad that everybody showed up. Please, like I said, go through and look at as many of these links as you can. There's some really interesting stuff, and some of them might inspire you for other projects as well. I think that might be really interesting. But are there any last questions or observations from folks today?
No, thank you for your time.
All right. Well, thank you for being here, all of you. Thank you very much for being so active as well when we visit. And like I said, I am loving what people are doing with their projects. If you don't get all the points you want, do not give up. You can hone this thing and turn it in. I think the record so far has been like 6 times, and that person ended up getting an A. They got all the points. So if you see that points are missing, anything like that, look at my notes. And if it's confusing, contact me. All right. Thank you again, guys. And I hope you have a wonderful week and weekend. And I look forward to seeing y'all on Tuesday.
Awesome. Have a good one.
Thank
You
you.
too.
Yeah, take care.
All right. We'll see you guys.